In your order of service, there's a reading noted. I didn't bring one, so we'll skip that. But it's been a long time since I've been the guest in a pulpit. And I'm reminded of a habit I had gotten into years ago when I did this more frequently. So this started with a colleague of mine who was one of these kind of pulpit writing preachers up in New England, would preach at a different church every week. And every week on social media, he would post a photograph of the pulpit that he was at that week. It's a little weird. It's a minister thing. But what was interesting to me was he always took the picture of the pulpit from your view. And it occurred to me, I never get to see that view. I always get to see this view. So I've started taking pictures of the pulpit from the way I see it. So everyone wave and say hi to the world. Thank you for indulging my weirdness. I appreciate it. So I'm a doctoral student at Georgetown University. So I go down once a week to DC, take the train down in the morning, take a late train back at night, very late train back at night. So a couple months ago, I was stepping off the Red Line Metro at Union Station and began to kind of flow with the crowd that was heading to the Amtrak gates. I wasn't in a particular hurry. I actually had plenty of time before my train would leave. Extra time they give me every week. It's never on time. And so I was stepping aside to the side as a couple of people who were in a much bigger hurry were rushing past me up the escalator. And as I did so, I realized I was hungry. I had that feeling of hunger. And for whatever reason, I'm always surprised when I feel hungry. And whenever I become aware of my stomach's growl, that empty, depleted feeling, it seems to come to me so suddenly. Or at least my awareness does. Anyway, when it hits, my first reaction is, why am I hungry? As if I have no right to be hungry. Or perhaps I doubt that those signals are actual hunger. Maybe I'm getting sick. Or maybe I'm just tired. Anyway, as I walked towards the exit turnstile, I was reviewing in my head my food I had to prove to myself why I would be hungry. So I was reviewing my food consumption for the day. Breakfast, check. Blueberries, oatmeal, eggs, coffee. I love my breakfast. But that was more than 12 hours ago. And I thought, okay, so what I have for lunch? And I realized that save for a delicious cup of mint tea that afternoon, I hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. And it's about 8 o'clock at night. I thought, well, that's it. Of course you're hungry. It makes sense. And I can fix it before the train boards. So I grabbed a sandwich from one of those coolers at one of the restaurants in the concourse and found an open seat in the waiting area. And as folks were arriving and departing, hustled around me and each other, the sandwich box was on my lap, and I, did what we do. We open our phone to check the messages that you checked 3 minutes ago. I admit I heard him before I actually saw him. Although he was only a couple of seats down the row. A voice, first, tentatively asked, "Excuse me, sir, is that a bite to eat?" I looked up from my digital distractionator. I must have looked confused. He repeated, "Sorry, but is that a bite to eat?" He was looking at the sandwich. Then I looked at the sandwich. And I said, "Yes, it is. Are you hungry?" He mumbled something in the affirmative, almost apologetic to be hungry, possibly unhoused, and sleeping in the train station. I smiled and said, "Happy to share it with you." And I opened the box and I handed him half the sandwich, and he thanked me and ate. I do not know what made me offer the food. Honestly, I don't. It's not like I do that all that often. In the train station, I'm often approached for money, and I have to refuse because I don't carry cash anymore. Plus, that night, I was really hungry, and I just spent like $13 on a Thai chicken wrap out of a cooler. So just handing half of it over seemed more like a forfeiture than an inconvenience. But still, without much thought, I shared what I had. So I am one of these people who is suspicious of nostalgia. When anyone tries to claim that life was better back in some amorphous then, I'm pretty wary. Nostalgia tends to frame out all the ugliness and pain and sorrow of a past and offers only the Eden of our imaginations. Which is fine, such as it is. But it's troublesome when we make some universal claim that it was better back then and we should return to those values and attitudes we had back then. That's my suspicion of nostalgia. So right now, I'm going to make a claim that for me is both true and false. Friends, I find us living right now in an utterly graceless age. An utterly graceless age. Day after day, I'm confronted with a lack of grace in this world, a lack of grace in myself, a lack of grace in others. And so I don't know when this gracelessness began, but I feel it acutely now, today. And as I have been thinking about my sense of gracelessness, I do wonder if I'm indulging in some of that nostalgia, imagining that this gracelessness is somehow different or worse than it was in the past. That at some point in my or our histories, there was a more grace-filled time. Friends, if there was such a time, I can't recall it. But this acute sense of gracelessness pervades my heart today. We named our second daughter Grace, but it wasn't an expectation, a claim on who she would become. She was named for her great-great-grandmothers. Still, I wonder now if her name was a kind of aspiration on our part, or perhaps even a pressure to live into something. I kind of hope not. Anyway, our daughter Grace works at Starbucks. And nearly every day, she returns home from her shift with horror stories of customers complaining, berating, yelling at, and hitting on her and her coworkers. And for those of you who have worked in customer service jobs, you have probably experienced similar gracelessness in your work. And I listen to my daughter's stories almost every day, and I wonder out loud, do these folks remember that all she is doing is serving them coffee? I mean, it's just coffee. So angry, so rude. Yesterday, she came back and she had this very noisy encounter with a gentleman who had come in complaining that his daughter had been disrespected in the drive-thru, and this whole big long story. And my daughter's like, well, I could refund your money. I mean, that's basically what she could do, right? Anyway, yells at her for 10 minutes, storms off, comes back 10 minutes later, says, oh, I have to apologize. She wasn't at this Starbucks. She was at... Another data point. A few weeks ago, and I was driving in my way into my church there in Newark, I was listening to a story on the radio of a school principal who was one of those, absolutely incredibly engaged and beloved and committed educators. Her teachers loved her and her leadership. The children in her school did as well. And she loved her work absolutely. Spent her entire career not thinking for a second that she could do anything else. And then COVID happens. And she is asked to enforce the county-wide pandemic restrictions at her school. And the parents get angry at her. And they begin to leave angry voicemails on the school's answering machine. And she writes them all down. Death threats to the school principal. It was truly awful. And halfway through that year, she ends up doing the one thing she never imagined herself doing. She left. Left the school, the teachers, the students, her storied career. Pushed out because we can't seem to conjure any grace for much of anything anymore. And it makes me wonder, when did we become so entitled? When did we become so angry? When did we decide that the person dedicated to the long work of educating our children, the person selling us a cup of coffee, the unhoused man in the train station, was unworthy of our love, unworthy of our grace? Who convinced you that the guy in the MAGA hat and the trans woman carrying the pride flag were an existential threat? Deserved only our scorn. I don't know. Maybe we've always been this way. Entitled, fearful, tired, lonely, angry, hungry. Not with everyone, of course, and not all the time, of course. I know everyone here can regale me with stories of the grace you've given and received. Myself, in the last month or so, maybe just because I've been paying attention to it, I have been on the receiving end of some incredibly gracious conversations. Perhaps you here or you online have even in this congregation given and received grace right here. Maybe. In some Christian theologies, grace is defined something along the lines of the free, unmerited favor of God manifested in the salvation of sinners and bestowal of blessings. It's a definition that I find decidedly unhelpful. It's one of those descriptions that begs a lot more questions than offers any clarity. So let's start with a simpler idea of grace. Let's simply say that grace is a gift truly given, because when we truly give a gift, we have no expectation of return or expectation of anything. It's a gift that is unearned. It is a gift that comes to us unexpectedly, but most often, notice, it comes to us most often when we need it the most. It's a gift that certainly looks different to different people at different times. It might show up as the kindness of a stranger. It might just be the first rays of sunlight after a long, hard night. It might show up in the laughter of an infant. It might be that time when somebody said, "I love you," just when you felt the most alone. Or maybe they didn't say it. Maybe they just shared some food with you when you were hungry. Or maybe they just gave you time, space, patience. Maybe the gift is to stop seeing our discomfort as a problem to be solved. Maybe the greatest gift we can give each other is to set aside our needs, our desires, our thoughts and ideas and problem-solving skills and let others be. Be who they are. Be who they are becoming. To dethrone ourselves from the center of our world, at least for a moment, and place someone else above us, or at least right next to us. I want to return to my encounter with the man in the Union Station, that story I told a few moments ago in which I sounded like the hero. I like being the hero. Where I gave a guy some food because he asked for it. And perhaps you're thinking, well, of course a UU minister would do that. That's what UU ministers do, right? They're preternaturally nice to people. It's their job to be that person, their job to offer that grace. And maybe if they do it, I don't have to. But here's the thing about grace. I didn't conjure up this grace to share that sandwich. It honestly isn't my instinctive response. That grace was seated in me before I sat down next to that man. When I came off that metro train, realizing I was hungry, I stopped into one of the cafes in the concourse, just the first one I saw. It was getting late, and they looked like they were kind of shutting down for the day, so I asked the guy who was mopping the floor if they were still open. He said, "Yeah, sure," and he pointed me over to the counter. And as I went to the counter to order some food, the woman on the counter said, well, all they actually had available was the grab-and-go cooler. I thought, okay, fine. So I turned to see my options. And then she comes out from around the corner, and I find her standing right next to me, and she says this. She says, "Try the Thai chicken wraps. I just made them." I said, "Fantastic. I'll have one." And she smiled, this huge smile, and shouted over to the guy mopping the floor, and he said, "He's going to have the chicken wraps. I told him I just made them." And I realized in that moment her joy and her pride in her work. I heard in her voice the grace that she wanted to put out into the world, the unmerited, unexpected gift of hers that manifested in that moment for me as a chicken wrap, but meant so much more than simply that. And against my propensity to seeing the world right now as particularly graceless, it was her grace that seeded in me. She didn't need to come around the corner to offer me her best gifts. I didn't require them. I didn't expect them. I didn't ask for them. She just showed up next to me and offered me a manifestation of her love for another, and the seed of that grace was cast, and unbeknownst to me, in my hunger and my distraction, it quickly grew. So all I could do then was simply share it. And maybe that's the thing about grace, that once it is given to you, once it manifests itself in you, all we can do is pass it on, because if we fail to do so, grace withers and dies. I am not the hero of this story, merely the conduit through which a young woman's love towards a stranger manifests in a hungry man sharing some food with another hungry man. Grace manifest right there and then in the clatter and clamor of a train station. So friends, I have a request of you. Might you too be the sower of grace in this world? If not the sower, might you recognize the grace offered to you every day and move that on to others, particularly others who don't need to be held as problems to be solved, but as rather humans merely being in this world and doing the best they can with all they've got, just like you are. Because the thing about grace, friends, the thing about grace is you can't hoard it. It can't be kept to yourself, and it can't be left to others. It's up to us. So it turns out I'm likely wrong. This often happens when I write a sermon. I talk myself out of it. We don't live in a graceless age. We don't. Or at least it doesn't have to be. We have, right here in this room, in this space, all we need to fill this world with grace. It starts here, with us, inviting one another to awaken to love. And when we do, it's time to pour that love back into the world. Amen, my friends. And I love you, and may we live in blessing.
Hi, I'm Reverend Hannah Capaldi.
And I'm Reverend Abby Tennis. We are the ministers at the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, where our mission is to awaken love and justice in our lives and in the world.
We're so grateful that you watched, and we hope that the sermon connected with your soul.
We also want to invite you to join us for a live worship service every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can always find the link to that service on our website at www.philauu.org. In these services, you'll hear words like you've just heard, and you also get a chance to greet one another, pray together, sing together, and we even hold a virtual coffee hour after services to get a chance to greet some new and old friends.
If you want to support the mission of this community and you feel moved to give, you can do so by going to the website that Reverend Abby just mentioned. You can find that link below, or you can text 215-709-5095 and follow the prompts to give.
If someone in your life needs to hear these words today, we encourage you to share this video. And again, thank you so much for watching.
We hope to see you soon.